Imagine holding a time machine in your hands, but instead of buttons and lights, it's made of stone and dust. Well, that's exactly what the fossil record is. It's not perfect. Sometimes it feels like a puzzle with missing pieces, but every now and then a discovery comes along that's so incredible it transports you straight to the age of the dinosaurs. Usually, we come across amazing finds like ancient skeletons prepared for battle, teeth sharp enough to cut through anything, or even armor that would make any medieval knight jealous. But what about the soft stuff? The fragile parts that don't fossilize so easily? When we find those, it's like striking gold in an abandoned mine. Scales that once shimmered, gigantic feathers that make you think of massive birds, or skin that looks like it belonged to some awe-inspiring creature. These discoveries help us see just how magnificent these beings were and allow us to imagine what it was like when they ruled the planet. But wait, because there's something even crazier than all of that. Fossils that hide the secrets of their guts. Yes, we're talking about petrified internal organs, perfectly preserved, so rare that they seem almost unreal. When these treasures appear, they tell stories so vivid that they seem to come to life just by looking at them. So, let's dive in because I'm about to tell you about 3 mind-blowing discoveries. These are 3 dinosaur fossils that contain the internal organs of other species inside them, and the first one will leave you speechless. This specimen dates back 121 million years. Raptors, or as scientists call them, dromaeosaurs, are those agile, cunning dinosaurs we all recognize from movies. This particular one was found in northern China, nearly complete, trapped in a slab of rock. In 2022, paleontologists studied it in detail and named it Darlong wangji, a new species added to the list of prehistoric wonders. Darlong wasn't exactly a giant, about 1.5 meters, 5 feet long, making it the perfect size to dart through the underbrush. It was covered in a coat of feathers, giving it a mix of bird and dinosaur traits. In fact, some of those feathers were preserved alongside the skeleton. Traces can be seen on the back of its head, neck, and spine, as well as short feathers running along its tail. But the real spectacle lies inside its body. In the lower half of its abdomen, there's a bluish layer that paleontologists compared to the intestines of Scipionyx, another fossil we'll talk about later. And that's no coincidence. This layer appears in the exact same part of the body as in Scipionyx, and its texture is so similar it looks like it was cast from the same mold. Under an electron microscope, scientists discovered that it's made of tiny, tightly packed microcrystals, just like Scipionyx's fossilized intestines. This confirms that, yes, these are the mineralized guts of this raptor, preserved thanks to decomposition bacteria that work quickly after its death, leaving behind a perfect copy of its insides. There's no trace of the stomach. It seems that its highly acidic contents caused it to decompose too quickly, leaving only clues about what was around it. The fact that Darlong's intestines are so similar to Scipionyx's is intriguing because these 2 dinosaurs weren't closely related. If Scipionyx turns out to be a relative of Carcharodontosaurus or Spinosaurus, it would be quite distant from Darlong, which, as a dromaeosaur, is more closely related to modern birds. So what does this tell us? That many carnivorous dinosaurs, even if they belong to different evolutionary branches, likely had very similar digestive systems, with intestines arranged in nearly the same way. It's as if they followed the same prehistoric blueprint for their bodies. Without incredible fossils like this one, we would never have been able to glimpse these details of soft tissue biology. Darlong, with its feathers and blue-tinged intestines, gives us a window into a lost world that continues to astonish us. Are you enjoying what you're watching? If so, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me keep creating content like this for you. It costs you nothing, and it motivates me a lot to keep making more videos. So if you want to support the channel, go ahead and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss anything. Now let's talk about Scipionyx, the little dinosaur I mentioned earlier, a creature that lived 113 million years ago in what is now Italy. Imagine the moment scientists discovered the fossil of this tiny carnivorous dinosaur, a predator no bigger than a house cat, but so incredibly well preserved that researchers could study the details of its internal organs. They named it Scipionyx samniticus, and it's no ordinary dinosaur. This little one has its heart, stomach, intestines, trachea, and other soft tissues still visible inside its rib cage. It's as if time stood still for Scipionyx, giving us an unmatched glimpse into its inner workings. When the fossil was officially announced in 1998, scientists could hardly believe it. because Scipionyx is truly one of a kind. The story of how it was found is almost as fascinating as the creature itself. It all started in 1981, when a fossil collector unearthed it in a small quarry about 50 kilometers, 30 miles, northeast of Naples. At first, he thought he had found some rare prehistoric bird, so he took it home and started playing amateur paleontologist. He carefully chipped away at the rock, glued the bones together with vinyl adhesive to keep them from falling apart, and even added some stone slabs around it to make the fossil look more complete. He even made a fake tail to fill in the missing parts. But it wasn't until '93, after watching Jurassic Park in theaters, that he had an epiphany. Maybe this fossil was something bigger than he'd thought. So he took it to the Natural History Museum in Milan, where experts gave him the shocking news. It wasn't a bird, it was the first non-avian dinosaur ever discovered in Italy. Between 1993 and 1998, museum scientists got to work. They removed the fake tail, cleaned the fossil, and uncovered even more hidden bones that the collector hadn't touched. And then, bam! As they worked, they uncovered something incredible. Mineralized remains of internal organs that had been preserved for over 100 million years, as if the dinosaur had decided to keep its secrets just for us. The heart that once beat as this little hunter ran through its world, the intestines that digested its last meal, and even the trachea that once inhaled prehistoric air, it was all there. Scipionyx's skeleton measures about 23 centimeters, 9 inches long, but in life, with its full tail, it likely reached around 46 centimeters, 18 inches. It wasn't a giant, it was small, agile, and curious, probably chasing insects or tiny prey with its sharp little teeth. Since its discovery, paleontologists have been studying it relentlessly, analyzing every detail of its organs like detectives solving an ancient mystery. Because of its tiny size and certain skeletal features, experts believe this little Scipionyx was no older than 3 weeks when it died. Now, figuring out exactly what kind of dinosaur this Italian fossil belongs to has sparked a scientific debate, as intense as arguing over who makes the best espresso. At first, researchers classified it as a member of the Compsognathidae family, a group of small, speedy carnivorous dinosaurs, like the famous Compsognathus, a lightweight sprinter of its time. But in recent years, some scientists have said, wait a minute, this could actually be a baby Carcharodontosaurid, one of those massive serrated-toothed predators, or maybe even related to Spinosaurids, those bizarre crocodile-backed creatures. The debate is ongoing, but one thing is certain. This fossil is a true treasure. What makes Scipionyx so mind-blowing is that it doesn't just have traces of its organs. Some of them are preserved in 3D, as if frozen in time. During fossilization, the organs mineralized with calcium phosphate, a process that sounds complicated but basically means they were preserved in stunning detail. This also tells us that this tiny dinosaur must have been buried extremely quickly after its death, as if nature itself wanted to seal it in a time capsule. If you look closely at the base of its neck, you can see 8 to 10 C-shaped rings embedded in fossilized connective tissue. They look like tiny, perfectly aligned donuts, and they're actually tracheal rings, cartilage structures that kept its throat open so it could breathe while chasing down whatever it hunted. And then there are the intestines, the real stars of the show. They're so well preserved and three-dimensional that the paleontologists studying Scipionyx were left in awe. They described the intestinal loops as bulging and glossy, as if they had just been dissected from a modern animal. It's incredible. We're talking about 113 million-year-old guts that still have texture, almost as if you could reach out and feel them, perfectly preserved since this little predator's last meal. The intestines of Scipionyx gave scientists a huge surprise. They were positioned much farther forward in its body than experts had expected for non-avian dinosaurs. And that's not all. Paleontologists could actually distinguish different sections of the intestines, almost like dissecting a biology lesson in fossil form. The duodenum, jejunum, and ileum were all mapped out as clearly as if they were labeled on a diagram. Following the intestines to the back, researchers even found the rectum of this tiny dinosaur. And right after that, a little ball of fossilized poop. Yes, a coprolite, the scientific term for prehistoric poop, packed with tiny fish scales inside. How incredible is that? And speaking of details, paleontologists played detective and managed to reconstruct the exact order of Scipionyx's last meals. Near the tracheal rings at the base of the neck, they found fragments of bones and scales lined up, likely marking where the esophagus had once been, the tube that carried food down. Moving further along, just before the intestines, they discovered a cluster of lizard bones, including a tiny foot, indicating the stomach's location. The stomach itself hadn't been preserved, likely dissolved by its own acidic juices, but the evidence was all there. Inside the intestines, scientists found even more lizard scales and fish bones, and then, in that final poop pellet, even more fish scales. From these clues, they pieced together Scipionyx's final prehistoric feast. First a fish, then another fish, after that, a lizard, followed by a second lizard, and finally, either a third lizard or one last fish to top it all off. This discovery suggests that Scipionyx might not have been hunting on its own. A 3-week-old baby dinosaur probably wouldn't have been able to chase after slippery fish or fast-moving lizards. So, could its parents have been feeding it? It's an intriguing possibility. There's even more to this fossilized wonder. Just in front of the intestines and where the stomach would have been, scientists found a reddish stain in the surrounding sediment and on some nearby bones. Based on its color and position, researchers believe it could be the remains of the liver, rich in iron minerals left behind from decomposed hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in the blood. Special analyses confirmed that the iron in that red stain came from Scipionyx's own blood, meaning that reddish mark is likely its liver, or maybe even its heart. Imagine that. A heart that beat millions of years ago, leaving behind a trace for us to discover today. When we look at modern birds and crocodiles, we see that their livers and hearts are right next to each other. So it makes sense that in non-avian dinosaurs like Scipionyx, they would have been neighbors too. And it's not just the heart that might have left its mark. The spleen, an organ that stores extra blood, is also located near the liver in birds and crocs, meaning it could have contributed to this prehistoric stain as well. Even though no actual muscle tissue from the heart remains, the fact that traces of Scipionyx's blood have survived for 113 million years is absolutely mind-blowing. And the surprises don't stop there, because Scipionyx also preserved its muscles in 3D. In several areas of its body, you can actually see muscle fiber bundles so well defined they look like they came straight from an anatomy textbook. Under an electron microscope, scientists even spotted the fine bands of the muscle fibers, which are linked to sarcomeres, the microscopic structures that allow muscles to contract and move. At the base of the neck, some muscles are incredibly well preserved because they were quickly replaced by calcium phosphate minerals. Others, fossilized with apatite crystals, lost some of their fine detail but are still astonishing. Another spot where the muscles shine is at the base of the tail. Scientists identified at least 3 distinct muscles connecting the pelvis to the hind legs, including the main muscle responsible for leg movement. Thanks to this, paleontologists have been able to study dinosaur muscle function in an unprecedented way, almost like watching Scipionyx run in slow motion through time. And if you thought Scipionyx couldn't get any more incredible, check this out. Its claws still have their keratin sheaths. These sheaths, made of the same material as human fingernails, covered the claw bones in life, making them even longer and sharper than what the skeleton alone suggests. The level of detail preserved in Scipionyx is absolutely insane. This fossil gives us an unparalleled glimpse into the soft tissue anatomy of creatures that vanished long ago. It's like a prehistoric time capsule, revealing secrets that scientists never thought they'd get to see. So far, we've seen mind-blowing fossils preserving internal organs, but now I'm going to tell you about one that's even more incredible, a fossil that preserves traces of a dinosaur's brain. This is truly exciting because brain tissue is super fragile and decays quickly after death, which is why we almost never find it fossilized. Usually, when paleontologists want to study the brain of a prehistoric animal, they use something called endocasts, which are natural molds of the brain cavity inside the skull. Or, if not, they scan the skull and create a digital reconstruction of that space. But in this special case, they found actual remnants of brain tissue stuck to the walls of the endocast, something totally out of the ordinary. This treasure was discovered on a beach on the south coast of England, within a geological formation that's about 133 million years old. It belongs to an iguanodon, one of those large, sturdy herbivores that looked like walking tanks. Finding a part of the brain from one of these ancient reptiles is as rare as winning the lottery twice in a row. At first glance, the fossil doesn't look like much. It's just a small brown stone, something you could easily kick without noticing. But once you understand what you're looking at, your jaw will drop. It's a partial endocast of the brain, formed by sediments that filled the space in the skull where the brain used to be. But the incredible part is that the surface of the endocast has mineralized remains of the membranes that once surrounded the brain when the dinosaur was alive. And there's more. Under an electron microscope, you can see individual blood vessels, like tiny rivers frozen in time. To top it off, there might even be bits of the outer cortex, the part of the brain responsible for thinking, or at least deciding which plant to eat next. The article describing this fossil includes images that help explain what we're seeing. Paleontologists already know what the brain of an iguanodon looked like thanks to other, more complete endocasts. So from this, we can imagine how it fit inside the skull of this dinosaur. Picture a blue model of the complete brain, showing its anatomy. Roman numerals mark where the main cranial nerve pathways were, like a prehistoric road map. The light blue shows which part of the brain is preserved in this particular fossil. If you look at the shape of the fossil, you can distinguish expected features like the pineal and dural peaks, which perfectly match what we know about the brain of an iguanodon. The green in the images shows how far the outer layer of preserved brain tissue extends over the endocast. The red highlights layers of a mineral called siderite, and the blue marks bone fragments. These bones could have come from the skull that once protected the brain, or they may have gotten mixed into the sediment that filled the space where the soft brain used to be. Experts believe this iguanodon died near a shallow, stagnant pool of water with the top of its head submerged in the mud. The sediment must have covered it quickly, preserving these wonders for us to discover millions of years later. This fossil isn't just a rare find. It's a direct window into the brain of a dinosaur that once roamed the earth, chewing on plants. It makes us imagine how its mind worked, what it saw, what it smelled, and maybe even how it avoided predators. It's like a little time capsule connecting us to a lost world. The water conditions where this iguanodon met its end were like an acidic, oxygen-deprived soup, a perfect broth for pickling soft tissues before decomposition could erase them completely. Unfortunately, the rest of the dinosaur's body wasn't as lucky and was lost to time, leaving us only this partial endocast as a reminder. The outer membranes of the brain, along with its blood vessels, were preserved because tiny calcium phosphate crystals rapidly grew and replaced the original organic components. This process, called phosphatization, was only possible thanks to that stagnant, peculiar pond where the dinosaur took its last breath. So what have paleontologists learned about dinosaur brains from this discovery? Looking at the fossil under an electron microscope reveals tiny strips of aligned fibers forming the outermost layer of the meninges. This striped texture suggests they are fossilized collagen bundles, the tough protein that once shielded the brain like armor. In some areas, there are also fragments resembling the arachnoid mater, another protective layer of the brain. In modern crocodiles, this layer sits right above the brain, unlike in mammals, which have extra layers. And it seems this iguanodon followed the crocodilian blueprint. Deeper within the endocast, highly complex microscopic textures appear, structures that don't match the protective layers. This has led scientists to believe they might be mineralized remnants of the dinosaur's actual gray matter, the cortical tissue of its brain. This fossilized brain also sparks curiosity about dinosaur intelligence. In most modern reptiles, the brain only fills about half of the available space inside the skull, surrounded by blood vessels and sinuses that form a drainage system. Because of this, scientists have always assumed that much of the space in dinosaur endocasts wasn't occupied by the brain itself, but by these additional structures. But in this iguanodon, the brain tissue appears to be pressed right up against the skull, less than a millimeter away from the meninges. It's tempting to shout that we may have underestimated how brainy dinosaurs really were. It seems like their brains took up more space than we originally thought. One of the paleontologists who studied this fossil explained it best. Since we can't see the brain's lobes directly, we don't know for sure how big its brain actually was. It's possible that dinosaurs had larger brains than we believed, but this single fossil isn't enough to prove it. And he's right. While this specimen alone doesn't solve the mystery of dinosaur intelligence, the fact that a dinosaur brain somehow survived the fossilization process and reached us is astonishing. Of course, it could all be a trick of fossilization. Maybe the brain was simply compressed against the skull, creating an illusion of greater size. Who knows, maybe one day we'll unearth another prehistoric brain that gives us even more insight into how these ancient creatures thought. Still, this fossil is like a prehistoric puzzle piece. inviting us to imagine how these giant herbivores process the world around them. Were they smarter than we've given them credit for, or were they just really good at remembering where to find the tastiest plants? And with that, we come to the end of our journey through some of the most astonishing dinosaur fossils ever discovered. The fact that soft tissues like guts, muscles, and even a brain have managed to fossilize and reach us after millions of years feels like something out of a dream. It's thrilling to think about what the future might hold, what other spectacular discoveries could be waiting beneath the Earth's surface, ready to rewrite our understanding of these iconic creatures that once ruled the planet. The Earth still has so many surprises in store for us.